Hello and welcome to South2North, coming to you from Cape Town, South Africa, host to the World Economic Forum, where business leaders and heads of state are meeting to discuss Africa's future. Now, across the world, women make up 50% of the population, yet never get to hold half of positions of authority. Take the USA. Only 6 out of 50 states have a female governor. In Africa, there are only 2 female presidents out of 54 African Union member states. Can these women make a real difference? And what are the struggles they face as women in leadership? To talk about this issue, we have 2 very special guests on South2North. They've both spent a lifetime championing the rights of women. Later on in the show, we'll speak to Dr. Mamphela Ramphele, a doctor, political activist, and former World Bank head who's about to launch a new political party. But first, here at the World Economic Forum, we are very honored to have a very special guest, the President of Malawi, Joyce Banda. Good evening to you and welcome to South2North.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You're the first female president in the SADC region, the second in Africa. Does that come with unique pressures and burdens?
I think in my case, I had a lot of time to get here, to prepare for this moment. I've worked for 30 years in the women's movement, trying to do something about poor women, providing economic opportunities and education for the youth. But I must say, the manner in which I took office, the circumstances, as you may already know, were unique.
It was a very difficult time. It was a very strange time, 2012.
Yeah.
And what happened at that time was that your predecessor, Mr. Mutharika, had died of a heart attack. And there were people in his cabinet who were opposed to you assuming the presidency as per the constitution. Now that you look back, why do you think they were resisting that? Is it because you're a woman, or it was a matter of differences in political ideology and belief?
I think when you get to that point, you get prepared, and if you're convinced that what you're doing is the right thing, you don't fear death, you don't worry. And then with me, coupled with this preparedness in my mind to keep fighting, to stand for what I believed was the truth, was the support of Malawians across the country.
How important is it for women to support each other in these circumstances? And I'm thinking here about the Church of England deciding to vote against female bishops. And it was fascinating for me that it was females amongst the voters who were resisting the appointment of female bishops were women. And you would have taken for granted that women would support that. So we're functioning within a political culture, a social-political culture that enables and privileges men at the expense of women. What are your thoughts on that?
In Malawi, 85% of the people are rural-based. So the majority of women are grassroots-based. And that's where I have worked. I have worked with the women in the informal sector. I have fought against maternal mortality, women's empowerment, gender-based violence. So those are the women that have stood by me through thick and thin. And I have asked my colleagues on the continent, they feel the same way. The problem comes when it is now women that are higher up, women that are your level, that usually won't stand with you, that usually won't support you. But what I have also learned during this trying period of 3-4 years was that men came out more than those women in that category.
Yes.
There were more men than women supporting me and fighting for me. I checked with a very distinguished lady that I know that is an expert in gender issues, who I had known while she was working at the ECA, Economic Commission for Africa, and I've known her throughout. And she said, oh, they had even conducted an international survey and found exactly the same, that women at the top don't support one another, and that women don't like female bosses, professional women. And that, but then at grassroots, it's the other way around.
It's devastating. Here in South Africa, we've got a phrase about how when women reach the top, what they often do is kick the ladder down so that the next woman doesn't come up. And we obviously need to change that because we can't achieve economic development without empowering women in Africa. What I do want to ask you is that now, after you took office last year, the hard job of governing a country that is poor, like many in Africa, in the developing world, with a GDP of about 14.5 billion US dollars. You had to make some very difficult decisions, one of them being devaluing the kwacha. You were criticized, there were protest action. You were accused of selling the country to the IMF. When you look back, would you say that was the right decision still for Malawi?
We didn't have a choice. And when I speak to ordinary people in Malawi, I say, well, if you have fever and you go to the hospital, they will tell you you need to get an injection, which is painful. You need to swallow a bitter pill in order to get well. At the end of the day, the fever will go, but you need to pass through that difficult period first. So in our case, I knew that it was inevitable. We needed to pass through that period. We needed to go through that difficult period. So we went back to the IMF to get back on track. Tell me what choices we had. At that point, the IMF were off track. The donors had left as a result of human rights abuses and our governance record. We have a very successful subsidy program in Malawi. That subsidy program is dependent on donors. If we had not gone back to IMF and get the letter of comfort and get the donors back and get the coupons back, the program back on track, the food subsidy program, we would not have had the bumper harvest we have now. We would not have had the Britain come back to and repair the relations that had broken off. So yes, it was a difficult time. Yes, it was an unpopular reform program. But I want you to know that as I speak, our kwacha, which had depreciated all the way to over 420 kwacha to a dollar, we are now at 381.
How does a leader go about getting the buy-in from the population that may not have the information that you have, but all they know is that you are giving them medicine that is hurting at that time?
By the time I came in, people knew that I had to take drastic steps. What those were, most of them didn't know, but they just knew that something had to be done, something different. In any case, President Bingwa Mutharika died within the 60 days they had given him in order to change the situation. Things. Yeah, so that is, I think that is the reason why when I started taking those steps, when me and my team sat down and said, we need to go back to the IMF, we need to do 1, 2, 3, the country was ready.
You were in a desperate situation.
Yeah, the country was ready.
Another decision that you made, that you sold the presidential jet, luxury cars. Why did you do that, and what has been the impact of that? And did you face any resistance from your colleagues who may have wanted to enjoy the perks of being in government?
Selling the presidential jet has been a huge problem. Number one, to find a buyer. Number two, to get Malawians to accept that that was a right decision. I just didn't see the justification for me to have an item that would only be used by one person, who is the president. Number two, that it would stand there and still consume our limited resources. So I insisted. So that's when finally the decision by cabinet was made to sell it. That goes for the cars as well. But finally, I also reduced my salary by 30%.
Yes.
I reduced my salary by 30%, and for the past October, November, December, January, they were just deducting it until I changed my mind and said, yes, you deduct it, but you also give it to the people with disability, that organization, because that way then I can track it, that it is actually going towards the poor. Yeah, so all these things I did because I felt that it was necessary for me to demonstrate to Malawians as well, to say that I could also make sacrifices. When you are sincere, when people can see sincerity and that you're a genuine person, you mean what you're saying, you love them and they love you back, nobody can doubt you. So that's where I am.
Lastly, President, I want to know, I'm a young woman living in a country that is very violent and I think hostile to women in terms of sexual abuse, domestic abuse. And we have done a program here on South2North about rape in India, rape as a weapon of war in the DRC. You were married at 22, I understand, and you were in an abusive relationship. What do you tell women out there who are watching us today and they don't believe that a president, a woman as powerful as you, knows that kind of challenge and can actually get out of it?
I have watched desperately women stay in abusive marriages. And I've been desperate in trying to do something about the situation to take them out. And I have physically pushed out the men and pulled out the woman and took her away. And I have come to realize that that's not the answer. The answer is that for 30 years I've said this and I've not changed. And I told President Obama the same when I met him last time, that until and unless we bring income into that household, the women will continue to suffer at grassroots. Women, we are worried now about population growth. In Malawi, we are already 15 million. I'm told we shall double in 2040 in that small little country. So you find a woman with 10 children, you ask her, why can't you stop? She will look back at you and say, you have cars and houses, I have children. So until and unless we deal with the issue of poverty, women will continue, children will continue to be born. Equally, I've seen women stay in abusive marriages, like I did, because they're helpless, because they're not making any contribution to that household.
Financially dependent.
They are financially dependent on this husband. The moment you begin to empower her, bring income into that household, especially through her, she begins to share in the decision-making of the household. In a few months, you can see that she has a choice to make decisions about her life, how many children she must have, to send her children to school, but also to walk out. So women will be able to get out of abusive situations like I did, only when you empower them. Economically, because just a month ago, a woman whose child was 18 months, being defiled by her husband, and by the way, the child died 2 weeks ago, I asked her, why must you stay with an animal like that? Because what I was told is that it's not even her way to report to the police. It was a neighbor. Why? She says, because I don't have the means. I don't have parents. I am just 23, and I can't live on my own, and I depend on him. So I'm prepared to stay and allow him to do this and not report to the police. And I want to say that just go through the life of an African woman. She has to struggle to stay in school because there's pressure for her to get out. She has to fight to stay in a marriage because there's pressure for her to get out. She has to fight to stay in parliament because there's pressure for her to be voted out. She has to struggle to be a president because there's pressure for her to get out. So throughout, the woman struggles. What we need are support systems. The women of your level have to be sensitized to say it is in the best interest of the women lower there if we hold together and stand together and we support one another.
Madam President, thank you very much for giving us your time on South to North, and that's what the World Economic Forum is all about. I hope the development of Africa so that we can empower women, because you empower a woman, you empower an entire generation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Another special woman joining us tonight is Dr. Mamphela Ramphele, who is a prominent South African academic and civil society leader. She's about to launch her own political party, ready to challenge the party of Nelson Mandela, the ANC. Good evening to you and welcome to South to North.
Good evening.
You are just about to launch a political party. Some have asked, do you have the stomach to challenge one of the most formidable liberation movements in Africa?
This political party, Ahang SA, that we are about to launch, is not about challenging a formidable or less formidable party. It is about the future of South Africa. It's about restoring the promise of freedom and restoring hope amongst the majority of South Africans who have lost hope that the freedom that so many fought and died for will be able to deliver the fruits that they can feel in their day-to-day lives.
Part of the problem in South Africa is the political culture that is privileged men at the expense of other social group. And this is not unique to South Africa. In the US, for example, 6 out of 50 governors are female. What do you think needs to happen to change this political culture globally?
We need to be conscious of it, acknowledge it. In this country, we have gender equality enshrined in our constitution, unlike in the US, and yet we don't translate what we have signed up for in our day-to-day social relationships. Even at the height of us having the largest proportion of women in parliament that we've ever had in our history, there was no attention paid to the political culture that has formulated not only our politics, but our social relationships. Think about it. All the cultures that came together to make post-apartheid South Africa, African culture, Jewish culture, Afghan culture, English culture, all the European cultures are male-dominated. We as women came together to negotiate this gender equality clause. What we didn't do is to follow through with educating citizens for gender equality. Mm-hmm. And that's where the problem is. And so women in positions of power, their only models are men. So you find that many of our cabinet ministers, they may be wearing skirts, but they behave and talk like men.
Do you think women in leadership face unique challenges? I had a conversation here on South2North with IMF head Christine Lagarde, and she was saying despite all her achievements, she's had to deal with misogyny. She's had to deal with patronizing behavior. You as a woman playing in that league, you were in the World Bank. How have you experienced this as a leader?
Absolutely. You can't avoid it in a way as a woman. You have to go into leadership positions expecting that you'll be undermined. And therefore, you have to stand up and make sure those who are trying to undermine you don't get a chance. And you don't do that by playing the male game, but you do that by leveraging the strengths of women leadership. You know, there is a book called The Athena Doctrine, which talks about societies that privilege the feminine in every human being, male or female. They do much better than the rest of the countries that don't. Look at the Scandinavian countries. They are far advanced in terms of not just talking gender equality, but living it. And their policies and the reward system actually encourage it. And they do much better than the rest of the world. And so the issue for us as women is not to try and play the male game, but to play to our strengths. So we as women have to start celebrating the value add we bring to leadership.
Mm. And what about then our relationship with our male counterparts? Do we expend energy persuading them and convincing them or improving ourselves to them, or just getting on with the job? And can the job be done without that voice being present?
The wonderful thing about us being women is that every man is born to a woman. And we can nurture our sons, our grandsons, to become much more comfortable with the feminine in them. And if we do that, and if our school system does that, if our workplaces promote that, we really are going to be better societies.
Mm-hmm. You were born in the rural parts of South Africa, Limpopo, during the dark days of apartheid. Yet you managed to get an education, to be a doctor, to be an activist during your university days and beyond. You were at the World Bank. Why do you think, despite those obstacles, at a political level, your race, your gender, why do you think Mamphela Ramphele made it?
Because I grew up in a family of 2 teachers as my parents, and they never, ever allowed me to set a low bar. They had high expectations of me and my siblings at every level. And with me, my father told me that God gave you the brains and you must use them. And so I was not allowed. I could be number one, but if I had 80%, he'll ask me, where is the other 20%? And that's how I grew up. I grew up with a sense that I have the talent, the gifts to become the best that I can become. And that's what I've done. And I also have been fortunate to be born in a family with very strong women. And those strong women were still very traditional. They respected their men, but they were strong. There is no excuse for poor performance. You can be poor, you can be a woman, you can be rural, you can do whatever. You still have to hold yourself to a high standard and help others to keep to that high standard.
You spoke about yourself as a mother, and I'm interested in that. You're a mother of boys.
Yes.
Which, for me, raises very interesting questions. I'm about to become a mother for the first time in a couple of months. Given the patriarchy, the misogyny that we see in society, as a mother of boys, do you feel you have a responsibility to raise them differently, and how do you do that?
I have very loving sons. I'm very proud of them. They've made mistakes, but every time they come back and say, Mom, I made a mistake. And so I believe that we as women underestimate the influence we can have on our children, whether they're sons or daughters. So I wish you everything of the best with your baby. And I know, because I genuinely believe that my generation has probably done too little in terms of intergenerational conversations, that my conversations with your generation will enable you to really step up to the plate of being the leaders that you are waiting for. Because we were the leaders who fought for freedom and handed you imperfect freedom. You now have to make it more perfect.
I want to elaborate on that. The Arab Spring was driven by young people. They used all sorts of platforms, social media, they mobilized. This generation, my generation of young people, what do we need to learn and take from previous generations?
Arab Spring experience is a reinforcement, but it also teaches us something. If you are opposed to a regime without having an alternative, you really end up with a problem. Your generation is very fortunate because you have a foundation of a constitution and constitutional democracy with all the institutions in place. What you have as a task is to translate the ideals, the principles of that constitution into lived reality. And you can do it starting today in your personal life. If you don't want misogyny or gender-based violence, don't tolerate it in your personal life. If you don't want authoritarianism, don't become an authoritarian leader or manager in your workplace. If you believe in clean, good governance, don't support those who are corrupt, because we get the leaders we deserve.
You are contesting elections for the first time, the 2014 elections in South Africa, and you are quoted as saying you are in this game to win. Are you confident that's going to happen?
Absolutely. And the reason I'm confident is not because I'm relying on my own resources. It's because I've been around the country. They say they are tired of waiting, and they welcome someone like me who takes them seriously, listens to them, and gives them the dignity of being listened to.
Well, Dr. Mamphela, thank you very much for giving us your time here on South2North. And I know that the political party that you're about to launch is called Ahang, which means build. And that's what I wish for my country. That's what I wish for the continent, that we will build and take responsibility for our actions and the decisions that we make at a political and personal level. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you. Let's build.
And thank you for watching South2North. Don't forget that you can tweet your comments, opinions, and questions to @AJ South2North or follow us on Facebook. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.